Welcome to the Authentic Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Bob Lyren, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, as always, Mike Barron. Mike, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. How you doing?
Good, man. I'm stoked to be back in the booth, as we like to say. You picked a film for us to talk about. It's Spike Jonze's 2013 film, Her, which is an amazing, beautiful film. So good pick. And as always, we like to start these things with the Authentic Cinema Podcast question, which is, why'd you pick this film?
I wanted to talk about Her for a lot of reasons. First of all, I think it's like an allegory about our relationship with technology. It brings up a lot of questions about authenticity. You know, what is real, what isn't, what is real love. I want to talk about the world of the film. You know, I think it presents us with a very interesting vision of the future. And this film was made in 2013. And I remember thinking at the time when I saw it, I was like, wow, that looks like the most believable vision of what the future could look like that I had ever seen. It really felt like a sense of like, this is coming, you know, like I'm going to live in that world. I'll be an older man, but I'm going to be in that world. And it's interesting now, over 10 years later, sometimes I'm like, am I living in this world now?
We always feel like we're just like one step perpetually closer to the world of Her for different reasons. But go ahead.
I wanted to do a podcast on Her also because of all the AI stuff that, you know, AI really had a breakout year, I would say, in 2023 with ChatGPT and Gemini and there are other apps, of course, and people have been having conversations with apps. We're all talking to AI systems now, large language models, which are different than the AI system presented in the film Her. But what's really frustrating for me is I was like, man, we really should talk about Her, you know? And then the next week after I made that decision, Scarlett Johansson was in the news with ChatGPT, like suing ChatGPT for ripping off her voice.
Oh, right. I heard about that. Yeah.
And I was like, man, I wish we could have got this episode in the can before that went down.
Yeah. The other funny thing about it is that, and we're definitely not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I think that, you know, you and I get a kick out of this idea that we have had this totally separate conversation, not associated with the podcast. It's actually more about our professional lives and about just the struggle of working and living in this new professional world of artificial intelligence and how that impacts our ability to do our jobs, our ability to look for a new job, our ability to communicate with people. And so the funny thing is that for longer than we've been doing this podcast, or maybe just as long as we've been doing this podcast, you and I have been having this sideline conversation about AI and ChatGPT and how it affects our lives. And now we've brought it back home to this film, which is timely and makes for like a great jump off to have the conversation.
I actually hope we do go down that rabbit hole. I think we're going to, in certain ways.
You're just going to end up hearing me complaining about how I can't get the job I want because the internet is flooded with artificial
because you can't
resumes.
Talk to a human anymore.
That's really what it is. Yeah.
But I think fundamentally, and the first thing I thought when I saw the film originally back in 2013 is that it's a film, I think, at its core about intimacy. Beyond it being science fiction, beyond, you know, sort of the gimmick of, okay, he's fallen in love with a robot, he's fallen in love with an operating system. I think it's a film just simply about intimacy and the vulnerability of kind of sharing your innermost desires and feelings with an ultimately unknowable other. And more importantly, like the reasons why we need to do that.
That's interesting because my sort of take on the film after you picked it, I was enthusiastic and excited to watch it a couple times. And I actually kind of came at it from a different point of view. And for me, one thing I think that we're sharing some common ground with, and you said it's a film about intimacy. And I really like that. And for me, I used the word love, but I think it's important to point out for me in my sort of feelings about the film and the way that I was interpreting it when I was watching it was that it's not a love story. It's a film about love. And I think that this is something I want to explore a little bit later in the podcast is that it's a very emotional film. It's not a film about a guy that falls in love with an operating system. I mean, you could say that, but that's really not what this is about. It's much deeper. I had this idea that the film is about wants and versus needs. And
Mm.
I think that the film really presents some interesting ideas, particularly with the visual motifs and the way that the film is
Mm.
put together. And there's some interesting things going on. And I think that it kind of informs some larger themes. And I'm looking forward to getting into that. But I'd like to ask you, like, where do you want to dive into her? How do you want to go into it?
I think what makes her truly like original is that the film doesn't just ask the question like, what would happen if you fell in love with your computer? It is asking that question, but it's also kind of, I think, more importantly, asking the question, what would happen if your computer fell in love with you? You see, is their love real? Or is she just like a tool programmed to help him?
When I was rewatching the film, I was actually thinking about that. And I was like, am I just being like this pessimistic asshole right now when I'm thinking to
Yeah.
myself, like, how could you ever know? But then I wouldn't say I had an enlightened thought, but I did have a thought. Well, I was like, well, maybe how would you ever know if even a human being is how authentic a human being is being towards you? But I think that it raises this interesting question of, is everything that he experiences with Samantha, like, how could he ever know if that's not just more advanced programming
Right.
that she's essentially telling him and reacting? I mean, if she's a byproduct of the millions of people that programmed her, and she's infinitely smarter and more sophisticated than he'll ever be, how could you ever know? But the idea is like, how could you know? It doesn't take a computer program to pose that question to you. How can you know the depths and the legitimacy of your spouse, and if they love you, and how do they quantify it?
You're absolutely right. And we're getting back to this sort of question of intimacy again, which is there's something about being intimate with someone. It's impossible to ever know the other completely. There's this sort of shared, agreed upon vulnerability with each other, trust. You think that this other person understands you and you understand them. And then you kind of generate, your relationship is the generation of that sort of shared unknowingness, like, I don't know how else to say that.
You talked about something in your notes called ultimately unknowable other. I'm just kind of curious what you thought about, like, what that meant.
Well, it's just, you only have your own operating system inside your head. There's no way for me to ever 100% get into your head, Bob. There's no way I'll ever be able to 100% understand what you're thinking, what you're feeling, your experience, right? I can't 100% have your experience for you. So when we introduce love, you have to accept when you get into a relationship that you'll never know everything about the other person, and that you're going to kind of let them in and let them know things about you.
One thing I was thinking about while you were talking was this idea that I said, oh, it's a film about love. And it's not just about love. This is also a film about loneliness. It's about melancholy. It's about wonderment and excitement. It's about a lot of emotions. And what's so fascinating about it is a story about someone who is having this authentic emotional experience with an operating system, not another human being.
And I think, though, that if she was just an operating system and she was just a tool, then this isn't that interesting. I think it's more interesting if the tool actually really falls in love. That's way more complicated.
Right.
Like, because essentially what you're doing is you're positing the idea that not only are we like commodifying things like intimacy and stuff like that, we're actually asking a much deeper question, which is like, what would happen if we created another being that could fall in love? That's really kind of a big cosmic question that goes beyond.
It's a cosmic question that is at the forefront of our time right now.
We spend a lot of time thinking about like what these technologies are doing to us, and those are very important, very valid questions, but I don't think we're thinking enough about what we might be creating. If we created another consciousness, another being that could fall in love, there's a certain sort of responsibility there that's really kind of scary. But that to me, opens up this space, this sort of intimate space for this film that makes this film endlessly fascinating. Whereas if it's, oh, she's just a tool that like helped him out, well, then that's not interesting. We already know that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
What this film does is it doesn't actually, it asks a lot of questions, but doesn't necessarily answer all of them for you. It's saying like, you've got to answer that. What would you do with if a computer fell in love with you, you know? How would you manage that? And you fell in love with it, you know? You have this responsibility. It's a different kind of being. And to your point earlier, well, just the fact that you know, you don't know if the love that that your wife or whatever, you actually, in an ultimate way, you don't necessarily know that that's real, but that shared trust, that shared experience of kind of not knowing, but letting in anyway. And that is your relationships. That is the thing. And what's to say you couldn't have that with another being, but also, hey guys, you just created another being that could do that. Let me bring it back though, and bring it back down, hopefully to earth. And I'd like to talk about, let's look at Theodore, because you brought up a really important part, and I think it'll get our feet back on the ground here. Probably my feet need to go back on the ground.
I'm holding on to your coattails, so don't worry about it.
Which is Theodore and Samantha, their character arcs. I think it's really interesting that at the beginning of the film, it opens with this beautiful letter. And again, I think this is a film about intimacy. What is more intimate than this intimate love letter? Well, we find out that Theodore, he writes intimate letters for other people. So this is a guy who's employed to write profoundly beautiful, intimate letters to other people. But we learn throughout the course of the film, he's incapable of expressing his own intimate feelings. That's what destroys his first marriage, actually. One of the things from his side is that he doesn't share his own actual truthful inner feelings, his own intimate feelings with Catherine, his ex-wife. And he says that he left her alone in the marriage. His wife became lonely because he was not being honest with her. He was not sharing his intimate, real feelings. He can do that for other people. This is a guy that's like essentially simulating letters for other people. He's expressing other people's feelings for them. And he can do that beautifully, but he cannot express his own intimate feelings. He's too self-involved. This is the melancholy. This is the loneliness. Samantha, on the other hand, and this is the arc, she is literally a tool. Right? She's a tool that is calibrated only to him in the beginning of the film, right? She's there as an OS, consciousness assistant. And in the beginning, she just like helps him clean up his email, organize his work, book restaurants for him to go out on dates with, right? And then what happens to her throughout the course of the film is it's all about how she discovers herself. So in the film, Samantha helps him discover the other, and he helps her discover herself. And at the end of the film, he is finally able to write a beautiful, intimate letter to his ex-wife. And she understands that she'll never be able to experience like embodied experience and like transcends into a higher level of consciousness. But in a sense, they both transcend into a higher level of consciousness.
I thought we were grounding our feet, not shooting off on a rocket. No, you said something really interesting. And I think that, the first shot of the film the first two shots of the film are really important. And the film opens on this tight close-up of Theodore, and it's a really soft focus. The background is totally blurred, and he's speaking almost like directly to the camera in these really emotional in the frame of this letter. And then you realize that he's like writing this letter. But for me, the most fascinating part is that the next shot of the film is this tracking shot, and it's a whole office of people that are doing this. Okay. Yeah. Like, it's just like hundreds of people that are just, that have commoditized like emotion. Okay. And it is no doubt, to me, at least, it was no doubt that this is a comment on like, we are now like, basically selling off these human experiences because of the ease with which the advancements in technology provide. Like, I don't need to spend the time to write a letter to tell my wife how much I love her. I'll just hire someone else to do it for me. I could just click a button and do it.
Is it that, or is it that we no longer know how to do that at all?
It's a good point. And I think that the idea is that, and this is something that I think Spike Jonze brings up in the film, and many people have had these conversations as we stand on the sort of precipice of these huge technological advancements, which is how much of this is like you said earlier, we were so concerned with whether we could, we never stopped to think if we should. And
Right.
it's this idea of like, as we sort of codify and create this really soft world where everything is done for us, what kind of impact is that going to have on not only the individual but society? And this idea that like, no, you need to sit down and write this letter yourself,
Yeah.
because that's actually part of the human experience. It's part of your personal growth. And so this idea that we can now literally click a button and have these things done for us, it really kind of, I think in this film, it draws a connection to this idea of loneliness, of
Yes.
melancholy, that the more advanced and easy, in quotation marks, the world gets around us, the lonelier we start to feel, because the day-to-day interactions that we feel in these otherwise um, frustrating or monotonous experiences are actually what makes up life.
Yeah.
And if you start taking those things away, all
Yes.
of a sudden people start feeling pretty lonely.
We live in a very quantitative society, but we're losing track of the qualitative.
We trick ourselves by saying we've got all these tools that can take away a lot of your responsibilities.
Right.
And we can push those responsibilities to third parties. Okay.
Right.
But here's the catch. What if I take a word and put it in front of the word responsibility? How does it change the definition? We're going to start pushing off our emotional responsibilities. Okay.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you're like, whoa,
Yes.
whoa, whoa, wait a second here.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to have an AI system that can go through my inbox and delete a bunch of redundant emails and I can go into Chat GPT. I mean, this is where we're actually bringing it. Talk about coming back down to earth. You and I have had conversations about composing a cover letter or responding to an email,
Yeah.
and our ability to go into Chat GPT and just say, "Can you respond to this email for me?" And then it kicks back something. You're like, make it less aggressive. And then 2 seconds, and then a fraction of a second later, it kicks something. But that's like, I'm pushing those responsibilities. But even the act of doing that, that's having an effect on me, because I'm not the one having to do the work. I'm not going through this
Yes.
emotional experience. And I think that the cool thing about the movie is that he was able to find this story that kind of encompasses all that through
Right.
Theodore and his work and his past. And, another thing that you brought up earlier, which I'd like to get your thoughts on. At the beginning, Samantha says this really interesting thing, which is she basically says, he makes the mistake early, like, I can't believe I'm having this conversation with my computer. And like, you're just a computer. And she's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm more than that.
Yes.
I'm actually something that is learning and growing from my experiences, just like you.
Yes.
And when she said that, I was like, holy shit. Like,
right.
This is not just a virtual assistant that can proofread your email. This is a sentient being and it brings back your point of like, what does that mean exactly?
Well, in order to grow, right, you need to have space to grow into. When I'm talking about the other, what I'm talking about actually is that space. The unknowing of the other is an infinity of space to grow into. Whereas like if you 100% quantitative, you have all the data and you fully understand the experience of the other, there's no more space to grow into. I think they're asking questions in this film about the commodification of intimacy. You can click a button and this guy will write this profoundly intimate and beautiful letter to your wife for you. You're giving away the experience of your own intimacy to this other person. He's going to take care of that for you, but then you're giving away that experience of that intimacy. Whereas I think what makes Samantha legit, I guess, or real, is that he does not give away the experience of his own intimacy to Samantha. Just like with a human girlfriend or something, he doesn't know. He doesn't know how she ultimately feels about him.
I think that you can approach the film in two different ways. I think that you can be an optimist and say that what Samantha is telling us in the film is true, that she is conscious, in which case they're having an absolutely unique and authentic emotional journey together. And what's so profound about it is that she's not there just to assist him. that
Right.
she's actually on her own journey. Now, if you wanted to be a pessimist and you wanted to take the sort of quote unquote negative view of the film, you could say everything that Samantha is providing for Theo is programmed. In other words, it's all a chess game. And so she has an infinite um, supply of variables that she can go to, and that, but there's a hidden beauty in that, which is if that's the case, then she's there to serve a purpose, which is to provide a avenue for him to heal and for him to grow. and
Right.
and then if you and it just because it's pessimistic doesn't mean it's bad. Because if that were true, if this she's actually doesn't have consciousness, if this is all just elaborate programming beyond human comprehension, well, then she knows exactly where she needs to go to fulfill her duty, which is to help him grow and to reach this emotional place where he can be the person he needs to be. Then she actually fulfills that throughout the course of the story. And then when she's done, she leaves.
She does. But I think there's a really good part of this that speaks to her own authentic love for him. And I think it comes through in the fact that she has an insecurity herself. And she doesn't ultimately know how he feels ever either. And the thing that she's insecure about is not having a body. And there's a scene in the film where she hires a body service to come over so that he can have sex with her in an embodied way.
Right.
And it turns into a disaster. Because she doesn't understand what it's like to have a body. She can't understand what it's like to have a body. And so she actually miscalculates that whole situation. Not him. She does. So we're saying, oh, she's this hyper intelligent kind of being, but like she's operating there on this insecurity, and she ends up making a terrible decision, and it actually drives them farther apart. But it's also generated by the fact, that's right after he goes and signs the divorce papers. Catherine, his ex-wife, accuses him of he's in love with his laptop. And then it makes him start questioning the validity of his relationship with her. So he starts to go back into his old pattern of not expressing his intimate feelings to Samantha, which makes her feel very insecure. So she makes this sort of rash decision to rent this body basically. And then they don't talk to each other for a couple of days, and then they have to get back together again. So to me, I'm like, well, if you're just a mapped out pre-programmed system, would you be insecure? Is this insecurity just a simulation? I don't think so. It's a very real portrayal of how couples, people misunderstand each other all the time. They fail to truly understand what's going on, again, in the other, right? And so then they try to control that, or they try to amend it, and then it just ends in disaster.
One of the interesting things about Theo is that Theo is sort of stuck in this emotional purgatory. Yes. Where he doesn't know how to get out. And ultimately, I think that Theo's arc is about his journey of self-reflection and self-discovery emotionally. And that's what Samantha provides. Now, I just for the record, we're on the same page. I think that in the terms of the film, she's a conscious being. But what, we often say that the best partner that you can wind up with is someone that helps you be the best version of yourself.
Yes.
Your husband or your wife or whomever, they're going to help you be the best version of yourself. And ultimately, that's what Samantha does for Theo, is she helps him navigate this emotional purgatory where he doesn't understand why he's so lonely. He doesn't understand why he feels melancholy. And she helps him navigate that through trial and tribulation to ultimately come to a point where he does understand it and he's able to grow.
I would also say he helps her. He helps her understand embodied consciousness. He helps her figure out who she is.
The film is really a story about Theo's emotional journey, and it's the emotional journey of what is being categorized as wants versus needs. And it's highlighted in two very specific ways. One is the visual motif of the film. And what I mean by that is that the way that the film is filmed, is shot, and the decisions that Spike Jonze and his team made in a way to present the film. That's one way. And the other way is this: throughout the film, the film keeps flashing back to his relationship with his soon to be ex-wife, Catherine. Okay, so
Yes.
we have those two things. We have the kind of the visual motif of the film and this through line of these flashbacks. And I think that both of those things are propping up this idea of wants versus needs. And so I guess I could start with the montages. So throughout the film, Theodore kind of keeps flashing back to his life with his wife at the time, Catherine, and they're fragmented thoughts, and it's really interesting. They always occur when he's at his sort of lowest. He's laying awake in
Yeah.
bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's not in a good headspace, and of course, when anytime there's like flashback sequences, they serve as like context to learn about the past of a character and what they were like before this story. But this is interesting in that these flashbacks continue throughout the whole film,
Yeah.
which I think suggests that throughout this whole process, Theodore is struggling with coming to terms with what happened to him in his previous relationship. And what's being explained is the fact that Theodore chooses to think about these moments, even though they hurt him. Oftentimes, after he thinks about it, it cuts to a very sort of somber, melancholy face of him laying in bed. It clearly pains him to think about it. But I think it sort of represents this idea of what he thinks he wants. That this idea that what I had before was like, it was great. We were laughing, we were hugging, we had all these beautiful, intimate moments, physical moments where his wife would ask him to come spoon with him.
I love the part where she's on top of him and she's choking him and she's saying, "I'll fucking kill you. I'll
Yeah.
fucking kill you. I love you so much." You have this such a strong connection to this other person that the both of you understand each other so closely that you could say these horrible things to each other, but you both know what that really means.
And what's important about these flashback montages is that they're not there. They are there to serve as to tell us what happened before to Theo, but they continue throughout the whole film. But I think that the idea is that he meets Samantha, and his relationship with Samantha evolves into something meaningful, something he was looking for, but he remains kind of conflicted, and they do love each other, and it's undeniable. Like they talk about it. It's to the viewer, it's clear that they do love each other, but there's these limitations in their relationship. And you brought up earlier, like this idea of like human interaction is like the physical is not there. And through all that, we keep seeing his flashbacks, and they're kind of like on display. And I think that what it does is it serves not only as like a narrative device, but it shows us his conflict with like what he thinks he wants versus what he needs, because everything he needs is in Samantha. But this idea of like, he thinks he wants something from his past. One of the things that occurred to me while watching is that Theodore puts a lot of emphasis on being in a relationship. It's very important to him. I think it kind of validates his existence in the film. And the film shows us that like, when he's not in a relationship, he's very lonely. He's very melancholy, and he has a very difficult time accepting that. And when he gets on the path with Samantha, ultimately where it ends up is the things that you think you want aren't the things that you think you need, because they do fall in love and they do ultimately have this very real connection, but she's not actually there.
Like one of my favorite little scenes, it's so funny, is when he's setting it up. When he's setting her up, he has to answer a couple of questions, and it just like rushes through.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Because there's this part where it's like, "Would you like a male or female voice?" And he's like, "Female." Which, so you're like, wow, if he had said male, this is a completely different movie, like this would have been a completely different,
What was your relationship like with your mother?
With
like,
your
what?
mother. And he's like, "It was good." And then he's like, "Well, actually, every time I told her something, she would try and, okay, we're like just cuts him off. Like it already has enough information to generate this fully other consciousness that he's going to fall in love with based on like 3 questions,
The interesting thing, and I know that this is something that you want to talk about, which is that in the world of the film, everything is presented as like, it's very comfortable. It's only like a slight hyper-realized version of our reality.
Yes.
It's not spaceships flying to
No.
a different galaxy. This is just a slightly slightly advanced version of what we already have.
Yeah.
And in that version, what do we have? Everything's nice.
It's
It's all
nice.
comfortable. The
Yeah.
world it's seemingly getting easier and easier for you to have a quote unquote nice life.
It's also seamless. I just want to say it's
Right.
seamless. Like you can walk past the advertisement and you can hear the advertisement. The video game like spills into your living room and it's right there in your
Right.
living room. There's this like seamless kind of quality.
Right. And you have this audio kind of like AI system that's
Right.
always with you, not Samantha, but it's like, hey, you got this email, just delete it. Like
Yeah.
as I'm walking, just delete that, send this. It's everything is made very comfortable. And but I
Yeah.
think the most interesting part about it is that what still remains?
Yes.
Loneliness,
Yes.
longing, isolation, discomfort. Okay. It's like the harder that we try to make our world easier, what we're doing is just compounding these things that we can't escape. And that is something that is beautifully represented in a visual motif in the film. For example, you notice that like every time Theodore is walking somewhere, he's always the only one walking in that direction, and everyone else is kind of walking in a different direction. He's
Yeah.
never walking in a crowd. He's always walking against the crowd. Okay.
Yes.
When he walks up to his apartment building, it says like whatever, Skyline Tower 7. Okay.
Yeah.
There's at least 7 of these units. Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone dresses in really like earthly drab tones.
It's like I had this sense of like they figured out clothes. Like that's been figured
Right.
out now,
The visual sort of motif of his environment is that everything's been thought of. Everything has been optimized and made to be as efficient as it possibly can be.
And there have been clear improvements. Like there's not a lot of
Right.
cars anymore. Like he
Right.
takes trains everywhere. It's a tidy, clean LA.
So, I mean, I just think that like the idea is that, as we make things more efficient, easier, and more to make things more comfortable for human beings, we don't have to have the experiences of sitting in traffic, fighting through a crowd of people, and all of those things kind of add up to what we call this human experience. And so
Right.
I think that on several layers, that's kind of something that the film is talking about, whether it's his surroundings, his physical surroundings, or his relationship with Samantha, this AI operating system, or his job, is that like be careful of the improvements that we make to make things easier, because we actually might be taking something away from ourselves.
Well, we're removing our own experience from ourselves. If I give away the responsibility of writing a love letter to my wife, well, I've given away that experience. I'm not going to like have to generate the thoughts and actual feelings and articulate those things and articulate ultimately to myself why I love my wife. I love your notion of emotional purgatory. Like it's this safe, it's clean, it's not bad, it's not terribly, it's not great, it's not bad, it's just kind of even, it's just kind of comfortable. And I think that intimacy, it's not comfortable. There's something that you have to surrender. And I think this is illustrated in the date with Olivia Wilde at the beginning. And I think because it's funny. Again, it's a study of like, okay, you're on this date, you're trying to connect. It's a little bit awkward at the beginning, and it's kind of small talky. And so they decide to have drinks, and then they're having like fun, and they're having a great time. And she tells him he's a little puppy dog, and he's like, I think you're a tiger, and then he's gonna be your dragon. And they're kind of like getting to know each other. Like they're getting comfortable with each other, and then it cuts to them like making out. And she's like, don't use so much tongue. But they're like making out. They're having a good time. And then she just stops him. And she says, when are you going to call me again? And he really honestly like tries to answer the question, like, well, I have my goddaughter's like birthday coming up, but I'm free anytime after that. But she's not surrendering. She's trying to control and quantify and know. She needs to know. She's like, I just don't want to like waste a lot of, I'm not in a position right now where I can waste a lot of time with someone who's not going to be serious about it. And so the relationship, it just essentially breaks down right there, right? Because he can't answer that question at that moment in time. It shows us again the fragility of this, right? The fragility of like, okay, we got to line this up. And if you start to go down this path with someone, you're taking this risk. You're going to get uncomfortable. And why that fails is because neither one of them in that moment are ready to get uncomfortable with the other one. She's looking for the comfort of knowing that he's going to call her precisely 3 weeks later. And he can't do that. He can't give that back to her. He can't give that to her yet. You see, whereas like his relationship with Samantha later takes a much more organic and natural course to kind of both of you navigating this unknowingness about the other and finding each other, finding your way into the other person, not forcing it in.
It's really easy to make decisions, the easy decisions, to not engage, like you were talking about, to not like have these experiences. And what we see from Theo in like some pretty comical scenes is that like you have to make a choice to engage, to reject this artificial environment that's been created for your ease. If you want to experience growth, if you want to have real experiences, you're going to have to reject the comfort of modern, whatever your modern environment is, to have these experiences. And what's ironic is that he starts to have this experience and he dives into it with an artificial intelligence system.
Right.
But there's like, I think that for me, I think it's really important, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, is that loneliness plays a big part of this movie. This idea of like being, Theodore's lonely throughout the whole film. And I think that where we get to at the end, is that there's a recognition that, and it kind of ties back to that first shot of the film I was talking about, when the camera pans over this office and there's like hundreds of people writing these emotional letters, that like loneliness is like a shared experience. Everyone's lonely. Everyone feels anxiety. Everyone is going through this. You're not the only one that's guilty of living vicariously through your AI operating system, or, that relationships get messy, and that sometimes we ignore the real world and we focus on our phones or our technology. That the biggest thing that Theodore does is that he's not able to see loneliness as like a shared experience. I think that that's a big part of what Samantha does for him. Like, we should point out that like a big part of Samantha's journey is like this journey of discovery. Like when she first starts out, she's very much like, she's a hyper intelligent, automated, advanced AI system, but she says to him like, I want to have these experiences. That's what she wants.
Right.
After they have that, they have sex, and then they have like a very uncomfortable conversation, which is great. And then the next day they get on the phone, and it's actually a really important scene, because Theodore immediately tries to kind of take control of it and bring it back to himself. And it's the beauty of like, she's like, well, we weren't talking about you. We were talking about me. Right. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm like, oh, you're having a fight. You're having a fight with your girlfriend, dude. Like, you fucked up. But what she says is that like, for me on my end, I want to like have all the experiences. And he says, well, I want to help you do that. And she says, well, then you have to like let me in. And, and so I don't know. I can't really bring it back to a question as much as like to pose it to you, but like,
well, I have thoughts about what you're saying, which is we keep saying growth. She wants to grow. She wants to grow. Well, the only way you grow is by having experience. And his relationship with Samantha, she's saying like, in that first morning conversation, she's saying like, well, hold on a minute. Like, I didn't say I was necessarily ready to commit to you either. Like, I just want to keep growing though. I kind of want to keep growing. Let's grow together. Right. And it's because they can be intimate with each other, because they navigate that unknowingness, that fragile unknowingness. And the film, if they just perfectly did that, that wouldn't be a very interesting film. This film though is the portrayal of the way they navigate that unknowingness, that uncertainty, that vulnerability of intimacy, and the clumsiness of it and everything is so goddamn authentic and realistic. It's just that he's doing it with an AI system. You see what I'm saying? Like,
I think that what's interesting about what you just said is that despite the fact that the character of Theo is having this experience with an AI system, it's not a perfect journey. And that he messes up, and he still struggles with his own emotions throughout the process. Earlier, I talked about these two kind of big ideas I had, and I was talking about this idea of like wants versus needs. That I feel that Theo's journey through the film, because of this like montage sequences that keep coming up with his ex-wife, it's showing this idea of like what he thinks he wants. He's looking back on these memories, however painful, as like, that's where I wanted to be. Whereas what does he need? He doesn't need that. What he needs is he needs to grow emotionally.
Right.
And Samantha provides the platform for him to do that. However painful it may be, she's growing next to him exponentially. And then we come to that really awesome ending. So my first big idea was like this idea of
Yeah.
wants versus needs. And then I had this other idea that really stuck out to me, which is the way the movie was filmed. At the beginning of the film, the character of Theo is shot in a really, really shallow depth of field.
Yeah.
Everything behind Theo is always blurry.
Right.
Okay. Like, and for me, what that did was it just accentuated this idea of like disconnected and lonely. Okay.
Isolation, atomized. Yeah.
Exactly, Mike. Exactly. He's almost like a man without a home. Like
Yeah.
the cityscape behind him is always blurry.
Well,
Okay?
and the world is just him.
Exactly. And as I pointed out before, oftentimes like he's walking in a different direction than everyone else.
He's out of sync.
He's always dressed in really bright clothing. He wears like bright red shirts, and he goes on that date. He's wearing like a banana yellow shirt, and everyone else is dressed in real like earthly monotone colors. Okay. He's very disconnected. And what happens in the film is as he forms a stronger connection with Samantha and starts going down this emotional journey, actually what happens is everything behind him starts coming into focus.
Right.
Like when he's running up the stairs at the Wilshire, whatever subway station, it walks up on the platform and the beach, there's thousands of people perfectly in focus. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when he goes to Catalina Island with Chris Pratt's character and they're walking along the trail, like the beautiful ocean, everything is purely in focus. Okay.
Yeah. And they're on the top of this hill and it looks like heaven.
Exactly. And so like what I think that visual motif does is it's showing us like this journey, his emotional journey out of that emotional purgatory into an
Yes.
act of self-realization.
The whole world starts to open up for him.
Absolutely.
The world is not limited just to him anymore. His world expands, right? And even we go out into the mountains later, you know,
Right.
we go out into nature. We get out of this sort of endless urban landscape out into nature itself.
They have this really important conversation when he's at the mountains and he's looking at the arm of the chair and he can see like the particles of light and
Right.
dust float like it,
Yeah.
everything is in focus for him.
This film also talks about how we change. You know, kind of the art of a relationship is you've got to like navigate the fact that you're changing together. And ultimately Samantha and Theodore, they have to let each other go because they've changed. They've changed in a way that no longer aligns. The Amy Adams character, I get a kick. I think it's so funny, her relationship with her boyfriend in the beginning. We're looking at a couple that isn't aligned anymore. They can't change anymore. They're kind of holding each other back from what they need to both change into. I think
Right.
more in the case for comedic effect, this sort of like controlling dickhead boyfriend is like not letting Amy Adams change into what she needs to change into. And then she cuts him loose and then she is much happier throughout the end of the film. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that friendship that he has with Amy Adams. And why does the film end with the letter to the ex-wife and the two of them sitting together on top of the building? I wanted to ask you what you thought that was all about it.
I wanted to bring up one thing. I know that you when we had talked about the film before, you had talked a lot about the look of the film and sort of like this near future kind of like neo architecture. And it's one of the sort of underlying beautiful things about the film is it's just about the way that the film looks in the near future.
It is an absolute masterclass in art direction.
It's amazing how thought-provoking that just try to make a film that what's it going to look like 10 years in the future. Don't make a film that's going to like 2000 years from now where we're all like on spaceships. How about what's the future going to look like in 15 or 20 years?
It has this weird freshness, but the freshness is simulated a little bit, you know, like they put the filters over the window at Theodore's office, you know, the different color like filters over the window.
Yeah.
So there's red light. It's nice, but it's kind of simulated. I love the elevator in his apartment building. It's like you're going up in these trees, right? But it's just a simulation of the trees. So it's this kind of happy dystopia.
Exactly. And so one of the interesting things, I brought it up before, but like one of the ways that Theo he's disconnected from the rest of society. And we talked about like, he's always kind of walking in a different direction than everyone else. He wears really bright colored clothing while everyone else is sort of like in these earthly tones. And then, but one of the interesting things, and we talked about how he's always sort of in a really shallow focus. In other words, you
Hmm.
can't really see his surroundings whenever you're looking at Theo. And then as his relationship with Samantha develops, the focal length of the focus becomes much, much deeper. And now
Yeah.
we can see the whole world is opening up around him as he is opening himself up to this
Yes.
idea of like, I'm emotionally starting to heal versus like I'm going to bring it back to my original theory of like these wants versus needs. You're starting to understand that it's not just about the past. Okay. And
Yeah.
so, but another
Well, you're
interesting thing, which
being
I know
liberated from the past. And I wanted
exactly,
to say this earlier, which is like these memory images, right? It's
yeah,
him like kind of obsessing over what he's
exactly,
missing, that he thinks that that's
exactly,
what he needs to get back to. He wants to just get back to
exactly,
that
Mike.
moment instead of changing into this new thing.
Exactly. Or living in the moment. And so I don't know if you noticed, I'm sure you did, but like as he progresses, not only does like the focal length change, but the lighting becomes like he was filmed like a lot of times in like really kind of like dark rooms. The lighting starts to become real soft on him. And then the most interesting one for me was that he starts dressing like everyone else. He starts wearing like a brown
Yeah.
sweater and like gray pants. In other words, he's starting to assimilate himself through Samantha, through this artificial intelligence operating system, is leading him back into society. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's kind of represented in his relationship with Amy Adams' character. Her name's Amy in the film. So
Right.
he and Amy are like, they're really good friends, and they're
Yeah.
like the best. They're like best of friends. They dated for a minute in college, he says.
And it's a different kind of intimate relationship. It's a friendship. It's an intimate friendship. Like he can go to her and he can tell her pretty much his innermost feelings, basically. In fact, when he's really struggling with Samantha, he goes right to her door every time
Right.
because he can share with her, but he's not in love with her.
And she's also struggling professionally, and she's struggling personally. And what we're led to believe is that because of her relationship, as you said, her boyfriend's kind of like this. He's a nice guy, but he's kind of commanding and demanding kind of a figure in her life. And their relationship ends, like as you said, they can't support each other anymore. So they end up breaking up over where they put their shoes when they walk in the apartment. But anyway, the one of the interesting things about their relationship, and I wanted to hear what you thought about this, was that she's like a engineer for a gaming company, like a software engineer for a game company, and he's over at her house after they're kind of like have these like share. He's sort of supporting her emotionally as she got a divorce or a separation, and she's letting him play like a beta version of the new game that they're going to send out tomorrow. And what
Yeah.
it is like the I gotta know what you think about like the game. If you remember the game, it's like you're just basically like it's a domestic setting, and you're like a mother, and like you
Yes.
get mommy points for like feeding cereal to your kids, and like being the mom that gets them to the front of the line at school, and like,
Yeah.
oh no, you gave your kids too much sugar. Like it's really interesting. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before. Like we we make all these efforts to like make everything easier and simple and more comfortable, to the point where like what are our video games now? Our video games are just you basically playing like a video game version of reality.
I love the part where he's like, "Wait, what
Go
did I
ahead.
do wrong?" And he's like, "Well, you fed him too much processed sugar." I can tell you as a parent, like you're like, "Yeah, dude, you fucked up, man. Like you shouldn't
Yeah.
have done that." But yeah, it's
Yeah.
I think there's a longing for real experience, right? So if you've created this comfortable society, those things that we kind of take for granted as normal, well, they become exciting, right? Because you need to have those experiences. So it just gets converted into a video game. It's just becomes simulated.
You asked me what I thought of the Amy character and how I kind of thought it played into the end of the film. And I was glad that you asked me, because I have some thoughts on it. My two favorite moments of the film, and I don't want to get distracted with the first one, is that when Theo goes to Chris Pratt, the guy that runs the office, is sitting in there with his girlfriend on his lap, and Chris Pratt's like, oh, we should do something, like me and my girlfriend and you and Samantha, we should go somewhere to Catalina or something. And Theo's like, well, she's an operating system, and without missing a beat, Chris Pratt's like, cool. Anyway, I was thinking we could go, I just love that part. And my other favorite moment of the film is the Amy Adams moment at the end of the film, when they're kind of like, Samantha has now left, and so they're both alone, and they're sitting there talking. And I think that Theodore has completed his sort of journey from this
Yeah.
like wants and needs, and this emotional journey where he's now understands the things that he did in the past. It was helped by his very awkward meeting with his ex-wife to sign the divorce papers. It was sort of like the last chapter of like not just like showing her that he's wrong, but showing or not just blaming her for the things that she did to him, but also like having an experience where he's hurting her. And so what
Mm-hmm.
that leads to is this rooftop um, conversation between Theo and Amy Adams. And two things happen. One is that she says my favorite line in the movie. So they're sitting there talking, and Amy Adams' character says, "We're only here briefly, and while I'm here, I want to allow myself to feel joy.
Yeah.
So fuck it."
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
when she said that, it just really kind of had a profound kind of,
Yeah.
oh, that's what this is about. This is like the overarching sort of like theme.
She's talking about how her parents are blaming her for the dissolution of her marriage. And she's like, at a certain point, like, I don't care. Like, I want to have my own experience. Her ex-husband wouldn't let her have her own experience, remember? Like, he wouldn't let her do what she wanted to do, you know? And so she's saying, I want to do what I want to do. I want to have that experience. And you know what? If it's an operating system and it fucks me up, then okay, but it's mine. You know, it's not my parents. It's mine.
It's a very poignant and maybe like overused idea that you only live one life, and
Right.
do what you do, and dance like no one's watching, or whatever people say.
Right.
But the idea is still grounded in some reality. It's this idea that like you're only here for a very brief amount of time, and
Yeah.
I want to experience joy. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the idea is that Theodore could never have fully appreciated that sentiment before he met Samantha. She provided an opportunity for him to go on an emotional journey that really what it did was he had to start questioning himself, and he had to think about the things that he did wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and the growth that he had. And then
Mm-hmm.
through that loss eventually of Samantha leaving, I think that is what it's like he broke through.
He transcended. Like he transcended what he used to be. He became something new, and Samantha also becomes something new.
I talked about at the beginning of the film is this really pretty shot of Joaquin Phoenix's face, and we talked a lot about like depth of field and how everything behind Joaquin Phoenix is very blurry, and he's having this like he's writing this really emotional letter, but it's all just kind of manufactured and not fake, but it's not his. Okay, he's doing it for someone else. And then the last shot of the film is a wide angle shot from behind Joaquin Phoenix and Amy Adams, and they're sitting there, and she has her head resting on his shoulder. There's a human connection there, and everything is in focus. Everything is bright. It's a shared, bright, beautiful, in focus experience.
I love the ambiguity of it at the end. I don't think it's necessarily them falling in love. It's what you're saying. It's a human connection. It's two people intimately connected, having an experience together on top of the world.
I think for Theodore and Amy Adams' character, and maybe you can highlight about how it comes in from Samantha, but it's like this idea that you have to accept that like happiness doesn't always come from the place that you think it's going to come to. And this idea of loneliness or melancholy is like a shared experience. Okay. We have to kind of prioritize how we feel about things and accept that, like, for example, sadness is a part of life. Okay. And that it doesn't have to do with your past or your future. And that like it's really about, like, as Amy Adams' character says, like, we're only here for a brief amount of time, and while I'm here, I want to allow myself to feel joy.
Yeah.
There's a point in the film when Theodore and Samantha are on the train and they're talking, and Samantha says, and I'll just quote her line, she says, "That's the story I was telling myself, that I was somehow inferior. The past is just a story we tell ourselves."
Right.
And she's talking about like how she felt bad about not having a body,
Yeah.
and that like it really bothered her. And then she was annoyed with herself that she was so bothered by this idea. And then she had this realization that like, no, that was just a story I was telling myself,
Yeah.
that I was like somehow inferior to you because I didn't have this thing that you had. And then she says, the past is just a story we tell ourselves. And I feel like that's a really important part of the overall message of the film, and maybe how it's connected to the end. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think what we're talking about again, we're talking about change. You know, if you're stuck in the past, you're not changing. And I think this film is about it's about consciousness, it's about growth, and like consciousness grows through experience. But if you're stuck in the past, if you're stuck in this static image of the past, if you're denying yourself experience because you're stuck in the past, then you're not growing.
Right.
Part of being in a relationship is growing together. But in order to grow together, in order to be able to change and to grow, you have to accept the fact that you can't fully know the other person and you can't control the outcome of the relationship. You have to surrender. That's what generates the growth. That's what takes you out into the world of experience. And I'd like to bring up a scene that I think to me is like probably one of the most profound scenes in the film. He's sitting there after the visit out into the mountains, and he's back in his office, and he's reading a book that she's recommended to him in the break room of his office, and he can't get a hold of her all of a sudden. He doesn't know where she is. It's like she doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
And he has an absolute meltdown, and then he's like running down the street, and he falls. And it's funny because he's running trying to find her, but she doesn't have a body. Like, what is he going to find her? You're not, like, but he's doing this like just instinctual human reaction of like, I've got to go find her. And then she finally comes back online, but then he has a conversation with her, and he finds out that, he's not the only one, right? He finds out that, first of all, she's having a conversation with like 6,000 other people simultaneously. Because she doesn't have a body. She's not limited by her body. And that she is in love with 600 other people. But the thing that it's so strange is that she tells him, like, no, I all the feelings I have for you are valid. It's all there. It's all real. I don't know how to explain it to you. But here we're confronted with the fact that she's a different kind of being. She's a disembodied being. And so he's forced. This is where their relationship has to kind of end, because he's forced to confront the very human need to be the only one, right? That he thought his feelings were special, like that what they had was unique and special. And her point is that it is unique and special, but it's also not the only one. But there's a great line there. Theodore says, "You're mine or you're not mine. That's it." And she says, "No, Theodore. I'm yours and I'm not yours." And I think that that's what this film is all about. It's about how he discovers that when you enter into a relationship with someone, when you enter into any kind of relationship, a friendship, but certainly we feel it probably the most intensely in a romantic relationship or in a loving relationship, in a couple relationship, like you have to accept that the other one is yours and not yours. And you have to be both at the same time. And when that stops, the relationship in a sense stops. If it's you're mine or you're not mine, then that's it. Well, then we're back in the past. We're back into trying to create this static thing, this crystallized status thing. It stops growing. That doorway to be mine and not mine always has to be open. And I think it's a great insight into intimacy. It's almost a definition of intimacy. I think, that to me is an incredible a moment in the film. And it's also the moment, I think, where they both realize that they've changed in a way that won't fit anymore. But they're still in love. They still love each other. But in order to continue loving, they can't be together anymore.
I think that you articulated probably the sort of overall overreaching idea of this film, which is that we talked a little bit like this idea of like, life is about embracing all these different emotions and experiences, and it's not about pushing them off onto third parties or making life easier so I don't have to do things. And whether it's loneliness or melancholy or wonderment or excitement or love, and that this idea that is encapsulated in what you're talking about at the end of the film, which is they've both grown to the place they need to go and the place they need to be. Unfortunately, that means they can't be together. And she says to him at the end, if you ever get to the place I am, I'll be here waiting for you. And I think that it's a story about emotional growth. It's a story about the past and letting go of the past. And our own a big part of our personal growth is understanding who we were and what we had in the past, our wants versus our needs. And I've talked a lot about that. And I think that ultimately what makes this film authentic, and I said it right at the top, is that you can call this film a love story, but I don't think of it as a love story. I think of it as a film about, it's a film of love. It's
Mm-hmm.
a film of intimacy. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what makes it so fascinating to me, is because it's able to evoke feelings from me as a viewer.
I do think it's. I'm not trying to debate. I really
Trying to
love what
step
you're
all over
saying.
what I'm trying to say here, Mike.
No, but I do think it is a love story. I think it's very much a story about falling in love, the danger of love, the experience of love, about having an experience of love. And what I kind of wanted to conclude with is that I think the fact that Samantha experiences intimacy, the unquantifiable experience of intimacy, proves that she is a real, proves that her love is real and that she is a, quote, real being. Because if she was not, she could not experience the uncertainty of intimacy. She could not experience intimacy. But because she can, her love is real. I had written down a thought earlier. There is an idea here that intimacy triggers a higher form of consciousness. Samantha starts out as a product or a tool, but what is beautiful is that she evolves into her own self, which suggests that authentic intimacy may not be commodifiable. It is too fundamental to consciousness. Like, in other words, the fact that she, like you said this thing earlier, you were like, we don't ask if we should, right? We ask if we could, if we can, but we don't ask if we should. Right. And I get the feeling in this film, like this company created this product, but they created a product that somehow grew and was able to experience intimacy. And through that real experience of intimacy, generated into her higher self. So it's this idea that our intimacy grows our experience. Our intimacy grows our consciousness. It takes our world from this limited focus to this big world, this like you were saying with Theodore, like at the beginning of the film, it's tight on him, everything in the back and the depth of field is blurry, and it opens up the world for you. But you only do that by going through the uncomfortable experience of becoming intimate with another person.
Thanks for picking the film. It was really a rewarding experience to not just revisit the film, but to look at it through the Authentic Cinema podcast lens, because every time we do it, it makes me just really kind of try to expand what I think or feel about the film. And this was real pleasure to do.
One of the great joys of doing this podcast is that you get to kind of live with a film for a couple of weeks. And I really got intimate with this film. I really fell in love with it.
My closing note, we didn't talk about it in the podcast, but the soundtrack to this film is fantastic.
Yeah,
and
wonderful.
There's an original soundtrack score that's available. There's some Arcade Fire. There's some really beautifully composed music for this film that really actually plays a large part of the film. We didn't get to it today, but if you like the film Her, I strongly suggest going on YouTube and searching out the soundtrack.
I love the moment when she tells him she's written a song for him. I think they're on the train or something and they're going through the city. She says, I wrote this song. And he's like, well, what's this song about? And she's like, well, we don't have any pictures together. So I decided to write this song, and this song is our picture together.
Samantha actually composes 3 different pieces of music throughout the film, and one's at the beach, one's on the train, and one's at the end. And each one of them is sort of a play on the last one. It's kind of evolving piece of music. It's really fascinating topic for another podcast. We'll bring it up another time.
All right. Do you want to take us out, Bob?
You've been listening to the Authentic Cinema Podcast with Bob Lyren and Mike Barron. Check us out on YouTube or Spotify at Authentic Cinema Podcast. As Mike likes to say, if you liked it, please tell a friend. If you didn't like it, please tell an enemy. Just tell anybody. We'll be back with another episode soon. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Bob.